we don't examine how to arrange our HTML documents with CSS using CSS Flexbox. Another option we go look at now grid. Grid too, they allow us arrange items, but they give us what we they call multi-dimensional control than Flexbox. So for this section of our lesson, I will show you what I mean by this multi-dimensional control. So for our example code, we get our main div, which will be our container, and then we get 5 children. Now each of our children, we will give them the class of grid item. Now for our CSS file, we go set the container as display grid. Remember, when we do Flexbox, we set our div container to display flex. For grid, you go do the same thing, but instead of display flex, you go use display grid. So everything inside go automatically become grid item. Now, one of the main properties for any container would be grid display, like grid template columns. Now, these grid template columns, now how you could take set how the columns with the inside your container, how we could take arrange them. So you go simply write the size you want make each column to be, and how many sizes will you write will determine how many columns you will get on the page. For instance, if we use our size as 1FR, 1FR, with this one, we specify our size, but at the same time, we specify how many columns. Why? Because my only 2 sizes we write. This FR na size. So because if we say 1FR in one place, then 1FR in the second place, it means say my 2 columns we get, 1 fraction for the first column and 1 fraction for the second column. This FR na fraction it mean. In other words, we want 2 columns of equal sizes. If we write 2FR, 1FR, now still 2 sizes we write. So we go get 2 columns, but one na 2 fraction and one na 1 fraction, which means the first size, the first column, go get 2 times as big as the second one. If we write 3FR and 1FR, it means that the first one go dey 3 times as big. Now, let me look at example. We say we write 3 sizes instead of 2. So instead of 1FR, 1FR, or 2FR, 1FR, we go write 2FR, 1FR, and 1FR. In this case, you go see we get 3 columns. The first one they twice as big as the other one because now 2FR. Then the second one now 1FR, and the third one now 1FR. So those two could be the same size. Now, if we get columns of equal sizes, we feel use the repeat function to specify this same thing. You feel just number right, how would they write the repeat function, and it will make them easy for you. How would they write them? Now, we go write repeat, open bracket, and inside the bracket we go put 2 things. The first way we go put now the number of columns where we want make our grid get. So we go use 2 to say, okay, we want 2 columns. Then the second one, you go come use them, talk the size. If we say 2 and 1FR, it means say we want 2 columns and each column may be 1 fraction. If we say 3 and 1FR, it means say we want 3 columns, but may each of them be 1FR. And if we say 2FR, it means that we want 2 columns and make each of them be 2FR. Another thing you guys know for CSS grid now say, they're limited to fraction FR for the unit of your size. I can tell you earlier in our CSS tutorial, we get several units for size. We feel use something like 200 pixels for our size. So instead of 1FR, we go use 200 px, 200 pixels. It go still work, but the difference between FR and pixels and why people prefer FR, I say FR they responsive. Pixels no they responsive. By responsive, I mean say if we adapt depending on the size of your screen. For instance, if we use FR and we say 1FR, 1FR, it means that we talk say share this screen into 2 and any size where we get divide them between these 2 columns. If you increase the window, it will still share them equally. And if you reduce the window, we go share them equally. But if you use pixels, I mean, think the time and say, regardless of the window size, you guys use these pixels where I specify. Now, it might even say, oh, yeah, use 200 pixels for each of our column. Is the screen big enough? If you accommodate 200, it will use that. But if the screen over big, it go still maintain that 200. And if the screen don't small, if you reduce your window size, it go still maintain that 200, even if your users no fit see am. Now, why if you want make it dey responsive, you will use fraction to tell them say, okay, not use any rigid pixels or any rigid size. Just use the fraction of whatever they available to you depending on the window size when your viewers they use. Now, another grid property when we get my gap. Gap just dey show how much space we want between each of our columns, each of our element, just like with flexbox. Then for grid, we be also use padding as well because we still dey deal with box model. Now, for our individual grid items, just like with the flex items, themselves fit take their own CSS properties. The grid container will you put all your grid items inside. Now we give all those properties will we specify before. But each of our individual grid items too fit get their own CSS properties. May we give our own normal background, then change the color, then we will give them padding of 20 pixels and we will give them border radius to make the border dey rounded. Then may we look into this very important property for grid display, grid align. Just like with flexbox, we will get justify content and align items. Grid also get justify and align. But for flexbox, now justify content and align items. For grid, we get justify items and align items. And we also get justify content and align content. Make we start with items. That is justify items and align items. Items we dey use on decide how all of our items go be. For example now, may we use justify items center and align items center. You see say e shift our items to the center. If we use start, it will shift them to the start. And if we use end, it will shift them to the end. We fit also use stretch to stretch our items. Then with content we dey use am decide how the whole grid go be. Justify content na for horizontal alignment and align content na for vertical alignment. So if we lose justify items, you dey do horizontal alignment for all your items. But when you do justify content, you dey do am for the grid as a whole. So justify na still horizontal in both cases, in both items and content. We just dey say if we use justify items, we dey do horizontal alignment for the items for each individual items. But if you do justify content, you dey do am for the grid as a whole. Same with align. Align na vertical for both items and content. But if you use align item, we dey align the items themselves vertically. If you use align content, we dey do the grid as a whole. Now for our CSS, make we use some properties for both justify content and align content. Wetin you fit use na space between, just like in flexbox. We say you will get space between the items but no space in the end and start borders. Then you get space around where you will get little space in the end and start border but more space between the items. Then we get space evenly where you will get equal space everywhere. If you also use start and end. Now I tell you say one of the main reasons why we dey use CSS display grid na because say if e help us achieve responsiveness. I go show you how we go even make your CSS display grid items more responsive. We go use what we dey call repeat function. To use the repeat function, you go write repeat open bracket, and inside the bracket we go get two things just like before. But remember, before we specify the exact number of columns wey we want as the first thing in the bracket, and the second thing we say na the size of each of our grid items. With this one too na the same thing, but we dey write am in a different way. Instead of specifying the number of columns wey we dey use, we dey change am to auto fits. And this one we dey say, okay, we know why we restrict you to a certain rigid number of columns. We want make you determine the appropriate number of columns depending on the size of the window of our readers, of our website viewers. How it will take determine the appropriate number? He will check the size where we specify. And now in the second argument, the second thing for this bracket, we go specify another function. This time we will use the min max function. This one na our way to say we want the minimum size of our grid items make e no dey less than this size wey we specify. We go use 250 pixels, and we want the maximum to be one fraction. So no matter how small wey our window get, you no go shrink the items to be less than 250 pixels. Instead, you go move them down so that we get only one column. And then for the maximum size, that is, if the window don't dey big enough, it go make each item one fraction. I don't want make you dey confused by this thing we will just do, because it's just as easy as the things we would do before. Before, we use repeat. Inside our repeat function, we give them two arguments. We put two things inside. I tell you, the first thing we put now how many columns were made e dey inside our grid container, and the second thing we specify the size. So back then we will use 2 and 1 fr. We dey talk say we want to use 2 columns and make each of them be the same fraction. This one too now the same thing, but for responsiveness we no say use 2. We say auto fit as the first argument. Say now you go determine how many go fit. And for our second argument, we don't say 1 fraction or 2 fraction. We use another function we would call min max. That one now just to fit get some flexibility. Instead of saying use 1 fraction or use 2 fraction, we don't say lose either this minimum or this maximum, depending on how much size the window give you. And with the minimum, we say may it be 250 pixels, and with the maximum, may it be 1 fraction. Now, let we go to some more complex way to use grid. More complex but effective. And if you learn them well, it will make your life day so easier, because you could just use this one. Structure your entire website easily. And not only will you structure for your computer, you go structure for mobile as well, because it is so responsive regardless of the screens where your readers they use. Even if they use tablets, phones, Mac, Windows, it go automatically align to fit the screen because you they use grid. Now this property we will take, they do this one with the column grid template areas. Grid template areas now we dey take specify exactly how we want make our entire website to look like right from the beginning for our display grid. Make I show you code example. First thing we will do now say we go set our container to display grid as usual. Now we will specify our grid template columns as usual. For here, we go say we want 3 columns. Our first column we want maybe 200 pixels, fixed size. Then the next 2 columns we go say may them be 1 fraction and 1 fraction. I not tell you before, but with this example, you go see that we fit combine different sizes. Just because you use 1 fr, mommy say you know if you use pixels, and mommy say you know if you use min max, you fit use different sizes. So this one I will use pixels, fr and fr. And so the first one will be 200 pixels, then the next 2 go share the second and third column. Then for our grid template row, we go get 3 rows as well. The first row will be auto, the second one will take up 1 fraction, and the third row could take up auto as well. Remember, auto means say it will just be big enough to accommodate waiting day inside. So the right would be auto, just to be enough for waiting day inside that item. And the left could be auto, just to be big enough for waiting day inside as well. Then the remaining space, now in the one we get 1 fraction could take up. Now, with these 2 properties, we don't specify, say, our website will get 3 columns and you could get 3 rows. The next thing now, to use grid template areas to set up how our divs could take up these columns. So for the grid template columns, we get our 3 columns and our 3 rows. We go use this grid template area to say, okay, our first row, we want may it be header. Meaning say that the div we will label as header could occupy arm. Then the div will be sidebar could occupy the second row of the first column. And the remaining 2 for that row would be main lane. And then the last row, everything we did there would be footer. Now, we set the minimum height of our container to be 100 VH. 100 VH just means 100 viewport height, meaning the entire height of our window, our browser window. So it will always cover the full view of our browser. Now the browser viewport be everything will with the view. Then we set the gap between our grid items to the 20 pixels, and we also give 20 pixels padding. For our grid now to know wetin be header, wetin be sidebar, and wetin be footer, we go add the CSS property grid area to the class of our divs wey dey inside the grid container. So for the header class, we go add grid area header to show say na this container we want mainly occupy the header area wey we design for our grid template areas. And we go do the same thing for the sidebar, the main, and the footer. Now, this one fit look like say e dey complicated small. No worry, you no dey complicated. Pause this video, calm down, play am again. You go understand. I will still re-explain them so that you go understand more. Now, to use these grid template areas for your layout, first thing you will do now, you will set your container to display grid as usual. Now, you will go and specify how many columns you want using the grid template columns as usual. For our own, we specify we want 3 columns. First column of 200 pixels, second column of 1 FR, and third column of 1 FR. Then you go do another property, grid template row. Remember, column, they show how many columns go there, but you still just specify how many rows you want as well. So again, we want 3 rows. So we set our grid template row. We say me the first one be auto. That's auto may just take up besides where you need. Then we say me the second one be 1 FR and the third one be auto as well. So basically, auto go fix just waiting the inside that their box, inside that their own container, inside that their div. Then the one where they middle will take up the rest because now one fraction. Now we don't use this one specify the rows and the columns of our website, of our container will be displayed grid. We'll remake the container of our website. After now, we call use grid template area to specify which div we want to occupy certain areas. So for this grid template areas, we say, okay, our website, we don't set them already to get 3 columns and 3 rows. So for the first one, we want maybe header. So we all go down to label the div we want to occupy this header as header. Since the CSS don't say, okay, we don't get the structure of our website as 3 rows and 3 columns. We want to make the first column be header, and we don't get our div we label as header. Now this if I go put to this header position. Then we go down. We say make this one be sidebar, main. So the sidebar will occupy the second row of the first column. You will all go which div we label as sidebar. Now this one, it go put them for here. Then we say the second and the third will be made and main. Okay, will that be the main? You go down, you see the one will be labeled as main. Then finally, the last row, we say maybe footer, and footer. Which div be footer? This one. Now I go occupy all of these places. Now, how will they use grid template area, Peter? And not only does this make our websites beautiful, we will also make up the responsive as well.